If you haven't already, feel free to set up your painting space. Make sure you put something down like newspaper or garbage bag on your table or wherever you plan on painting so that you don't ruin your furniture. And then make sure that you have like an old t-shirt or something on over your clothing so that you don't ruin it, just in case you get acrylic paint on yourself. I wouldn't want you to end up ruining like a favorite t-shirt or pants or something. Also, if you at any point don't feel comfortable or don't want to unmute yourself, there is a chat function in Zoom. So it's going to be in the lower part of the Zoom. In the middle, there's a little icon that has like a bubble and it says chat. If you click on that, it should open up a group chat. And then you can type your questions or comments in there. If you're trying to speak, feel free to unmute yourself at any time. I'm very informal, so you're welcome to interrupt me at any time and ask questions or make comments too. If there is anything inappropriate or disruptive to this class, I will remove you from the Zoom, so just a heads up there. It's only happened once. And then my name is Katie, so I'm an adult librarian here at Lyon Township Public Library. So I do a lot of the adult programs, but you'll also see Pam, who does the LTPL Grows Sustainability and Gardening programs here. And then we also have Kathy, who is our genealogist on staff, and she'll do a lot of genealogy focused and history programs too. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. All right, so if you picked up the kit, and I still have, I think, 2 or 3 left, if you didn't get one, you can always pick one up tonight before we close or tomorrow. It has paint in there. There's a throwaway cup for water. There's some paper towel, napkins, the PowerPoint, which you can use for reference, or if you don't want to keep it, that's okay. And then there's the image and the little canvas board that we're going to be painting on. And then there's also a list of supplies. So that's what came in the kit. I'm just waiting to see if we have any late people trying to join us, and then I will start my presentation. So what I'm going to be doing tonight is I'm going to share my screen and share a PowerPoint presentation with you first, and then we will paint. So I'll be talking a little bit about acrylic paint, necessary supplies that you should get to start off with, like the bare minimum, and then techniques, and then we will paint the image that was included in your kit. Lastly, we are implementing something new for our virtual program. So at the end, if you're interested in giving us feedback, tomorrow there will be an automated email sent out to all of you with a link to fill out a voluntary survey. So it's only if you want to, just for feedback and then ideas for future virtual programs. We will probably be doing virtual programs through the end of the year. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, here we go. And now, so you do have this in your kit if you want to follow along or take notes. And I'll be going through this a little bit faster, mostly because I have gone over the same information in the first class. If you didn't join us for the first class, that's okay. This is going to be the same exact information. I do want to spend just a little bit more time on the techniques. That's what this class is more focused on, but you didn't have to join us for the introduction to acrylic painting in order to attend tonight. So that wasn't a necessary requirement. So why acrylic paint? Well, acrylic paint is super fast. The materials, for the most part, are very affordable depending on the brand and the quality that you purchase. It's a lot of fun. It can mimic watercolor paint. It can also kind of mimic oil painting if you add mediums. And you can do a lot of experimentation with it. So there's a lot of adaptability and flexibility with acrylic paints. It's also super easy depending on what you're attempting to paint. And this is a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I did mention it's fun, versatile. It also dries super fast, but if you don't want it to dry that fast, you can always add a medium to it so it'll extend the drying time out. That way you can work with it more Alla Prima or over a longer period of time. And then I've seen painters out there, famous painters who've gotten very photorealistic with acrylic paint. Actually, they can get photorealistic with a lot of different art materials, but you can also get super abstract with it too. And the colors now, especially with all the improvements in the acrylic paint medium, are very vivid and very beautiful. All right, so there is a list of supplies in your kit, but that's what is mostly included in the kit and then recommended ones. This is a more comprehensive list of supplies. So the most essential is a surface to paint on. You don't necessarily need to get the fabric canvas that you have to stretch out in a stretcher. You don't have to do that yourself. There are pre-gessoed ones that you see in the store. You can even find them at Walmart or Meijer in the little arts and crafts area. But for like larger canvas, you'll have to go to like an art specific store for that. And I've seen huge ones too, and I've even painted on one bigger than myself. So it's a lot of fun. You need at least one container of water, but two is better, because one for just cleaning out your brush, and then the other one if you want to make acrylic paint mimic watercolor, you want some cleaner water so that the if you cleaned out your brush in it, it doesn't mess up the paint that you're working in. At least two paint brushes, a bigger one and a smaller or finer one for details. But if you're limited on budget, you can just get like a medium-sized one that you can use to cover a large surface depending on your painting space that you're attempting to paint on. But you can also use some techniques and edges and stuff of your paintbrush to get into finer details. So you don't really need a ton of brushes, but it is convenient to have a set of different ones. You need at least a minimum of 4 paints, and I always recommend the primary colors. So you need red, yellow, and blue, because you can use those colors to mix all the other colors out there, including black. And then you need white. So it's impossible to mix white unless you buy it pre-made from the store. Then there's I guess you could do that if you use gesso, but might as well just buy it. Then you just need like some firm structure to paint on. Working with the easel is really cool. It's a convenience also, and there are a variety of ones out there. There's some table easels, so it just sits on your table, but then you have the full length one that sits on the floor, so you can stand while painting. You can walk back away from it, so you can get a different perspective of your composition and where you're at in your painting. So easels are a great convenience that just enhance your painting experience, but you can also do it on the table too. So I'd say like the angle of what you're painting at can affect how your composition and your painting turns out, but it's minimal when you're starting out. So it's really not a huge necessity at first. And then do you want a palette? So I recommend like a sealable one, like a plastic palette is best, because then you can save your paints for the next day if you plan on painting multiple days in a row. Acrylic paint doesn't stay wet forever like oil paint, which I'm over exaggerating a little bit because they don't all stay wet forever, but acrylic paint dries really fast. I have tubes from when I was in college over a decade ago that have hardened, and they're not worth anything anymore. I can't use them, so I'd have to replace my whole set of acrylic paints. So don't expect to purchase some good tubes and then have them last forever. And then if you want like a plastic, you can get glass too, or plexiglass for a palette so you can mix on it. It's all personal preference what you use. I included some small paper plates for like a throwaway palette, just super easy and quick. And then lastly, you want soap for cleaning your paintbrushes, especially if you buy, if you invest in some quality paintbrushes, you want them to last for a really long time. So cleaning them is crucial to that, and then wrapping them so that the paintbrush fibers keep their shape. So in art stores, they do have paintbrush soap specifically, but I think it's a little more expensive, and it's really not necessary to purchase that. You can just get some Dawn dish soap and use that to clean your paintbrushes. And then I wouldn't recommend, like, when you go to clean them, I wouldn't recommend, you know, stabbing it in the soap or anything. You want to be gentle with the fibers, because the paintbrushes, if you want it to last, you don't want to be yanking or messing with their placement in this tool. So other things that are helpful to have, but you don't necessarily need them, are pencils. You can just use a school grade one, a ruler, eraser if you want to sketch out and plan first. A palette knife is super nice because you can mix paint with that. You can cut paint too and take it from the tube onto your palette, and you can even paint with it. So I've seen artists use that. If you're familiar with Bob Ross, he's used palette knives before to paint. I already mentioned a palette container, so you can keep your paint fresh longer. You can use saran wrap if you don't have a closable palette container. And it's okay to get paint on the saran wrap because it keeps it fresher longer, and you can always use it off the saran wrap too. Paper towel or old t-shirts for cleaning up, but also wrapping your paint brushes to keep them lasting longer is important. An apron for keeping yourself clean and protected, especially if you're wearing clothing that you've invested in, or you know, you have favorite clothing on and you want to keep it clean. A variety of mediums, not necessary but fun to experiment with, and they do different things with the paint. Masking tape helps with either protecting your edges if you want them to be clean, or if you're working on not like a board or a canvas, if you're working on some kind of paper material, if you want to keep your edges too, masking tape works really well, or painter's tape. And And they have arcful tape out there too, but I think it costs a little bit more and there's no reason to purchase that unless you're working on some paper and you want to keep it afterwards. If you want to put it in a frame and get it, I'm trying to think of the word right now, but you can take it to a person to frame it, and they put the really cool, I'm having a brain fart right now. I know what it is. They cut out the center and it makes it look really nice and presentable and professional, and then you can stick it in a frame. And then you can also get sponges. So you can use sponges to paint different textures on your canvas. If you have intention for some kind of texture that you're aiming for, sponges work really well for that. And then, like I said before, a scrap towel for wrapping your paintbrushes to keep them the shape longer after cleaning. So there's all kinds of varieties of painting surfaces out there. I recommend either a board that's pre-gessoed or a pre-stretched and gessoed canvas. The paper, if you do acrylic painting on, it can buckle and crack, and you don't want your finished painting to end up in the trash. So the paper has its time and its place. If you're doing like a mixed media artwork, then you'd probably want to use the paper so you can introduce other media into it. It's like drawing and magazine cutouts or chalk or oil pastels or something with your paints, then it makes sense to use this. But if you're just gonna be doing acrylic paint, it's better to have the pre-gessoed board, and they come in all kinds of sizes, or pre-stretched, pre-gessoed canvas. So what was included in your kit was a pre-gessoed canvas panel, is I guess the official term for it, and it was triple primed. But this you can get at the dollar store or Walmart or Meijer in the arts and crafts area. So there's some inexpensive options out there for you. So as far as brushes, there's a variety of brushes around there. If you want to start out and you only want to use 1 or 2 brushes, I recommend a flat and a round, just so that have the bigger fibers to paint with and cover more surface area, because the longer, flatter brushes hold more paint and you can cover more surface area with that. And if you get a round with a fine tip on it and you take care of it so they keep that fine tip, then you can go into more fine detail with that. But there is a variety of paintbrushes out there. So if you wanted to invest in all the different ones out there, you can get the angled flat one, a filbert, and there's different sizes. And then a pointed round one for finer detail. And they have the longer, finer detail for super intricate work in your paintings, which you would always do last after painting everything else. You'll see that some paintbrushes have shorter handles, and that's generally for painting up close. And then there will be some paintbrushes that have longer handles, and that's generally used for when you're painting with an easel, so that there's more space between you and you use a lot of your wrist for painting with the brush. So natural paintbrushes are the best overall for watercolor and oil paints, but synthetic tend to respond the best with acrylic and take the harshness of acrylic. So it's better suited for painting with acrylics. They don't last forever, but if you do wash them and take care of them, they'll last longer, so you won't be spending as much money on paintbrushes over time. When it comes to paints, all acrylic paint is pretty much the same, so it doesn't really matter what brand you buy. So if you end up buying paint from multiple different brands, they can mix together, whereas with oil paint, it's different. So when you purchase oil paints, you want to stick with one brand. But with acrylic, it's the same chemical makeup across the board, especially with the mediums. So brand doesn't really make a difference here. There's different types of acrylic paint, so there's different bodies, and I'll go over that in the next slide. So there's the heavy body. This is a thicker paint when you're painting. If you want to paint with impasto, then you would typically want to use the heavy body. The regular artist one might have different quality pigments. The open, it takes longer for it to dry, so it's not as fast when it comes to drying. There's interactive, so it has medium kind of already added to it. The soft body, I think, is one of the ones that you could use for like mimicking watercolor. And then there's like the craft paint, so the golden fluid is more like a craft. And then the student quality one has a little less pigment in it than the artist. So for the professional grade, it's gonna be more expensive. They're gonna, the color's gonna last longer over time, and the paint won't break down as quickly either. There are a ton of painting mediums out there. I've only ever used the gloss medium and the matte medium just to add more body to my paint so it lasts longer, because you can extend a pigment with the paint for a long time if you have medium to add to it. But as far as like the rest of the mediums, if you have like a certain goal in mind with texture or a visual effect that you're going for, then you may want to use a medium. Gloss medium makes it more shiny when you add it to the paint. Matte is not as shiny. Glazing, if you add this to your acrylic paint, makes it mimic watercolor too, so that's another option. It doesn't necessarily make it matte or anything, but it does make it more transparent, so you can see brush strokes, which sometimes people want that to show through. Some people like to use modeling paste so they can build up on their canvas or painting surface. But you could also do with heavy body acrylics too. So like I said before, the Impasto painting technique is just layering thick paint on there so you build up that texture. The retarding medium slows down the drying process of the acrylic paint so that it lasts longer. So if you want to paint Alla Prima all in one sitting, it doesn't dry as fast. So you don't have to be sitting there with like a spritz bottle of water to make sure that your paint is still wet. But if you intend to do more blending and you like to work slower with your acrylic paints, then you might want to purchase open acrylics. So some important tips to keep in mind when you're painting with acrylics: make sure you always mix in your medium after you've mixed your colors together. So when you set out your palette, you mix your colors, then you add your medium, and then you go ahead and paint. I don't always follow that process because I'm a little impatient, but don't do as I do. Don't use oil mediums with acrylics. They're not compatible. And then if you want to varnish your paintings afterwards, just purchase a removable varnish as a top coat instead. Don't use the medium. So there's no point in getting the medium when you can just do the varnish. It's just a waste of time and money. Let's see. There's also additives, but if you're interested in experimenting and spending the time and money on it, you can get into a whole slew of additives in addition to mediums. All right, So when you're first starting off with acrylic paint, like I said, you want the primary colors. So you want to start with, and in acrylic paint, there are different names for different colors. So yellow can have more than one hue or tone, and they all have different names. So one particular good yellow to start with is cadmium yellow, cadmium red, which is like a brighter blood red, and phthalo blue. So these are like the best primary colors to start with, and then you want to get a titanium white. If you want to branch out and have all the colors already mixed with you, you can go ahead and purchase the other ones too, but you can always mix your primary colors to get the whole spectrum of colors out there. Also a note on black, you can buy it factory made, but you can always mix it too. And the factory made black tends to always be like super overwhelmingly stark and contrasting in your painting. So it's always better if you intend to depend on the factory made black to add a little bit of color to it so it kind of brings it down in contrast. But you can always mix your own black too. So you can use all the primary colors together. You can mix primary and secondary colors together, or you can do complementary colors, which are the colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel, which I'll also be briefly going over. I'm not going to go over this slide. Some of the paint will have permanence ratings on it, and it just tells you if it's going to last longer than the other paints. And then viscosity, like the thick body paints, is just how, you know, the heavy body is super thick. If it's open body, it's not as viscous. All right, so when you go to paint, you want to make sure you have everything set up so that, because acrylic paint dries really fast, you want to make sure you have everything ready and in its place before you start painting. So you want to make sure your surface area is pre-gessoed and dried. If you want to, you can always stretch your own canvas and build your boards and staple gun it and everything together and then gesso it. But you can always get the convenient pre-gessoed canvas or the pre-gessoed board ahead of time, and that kind of cuts down on your prep. Set up your water, your palette, and a hefty amount of paper towels just in case you're like me and you make messes everywhere. I always end up with a lot of paint on my hands. Ensure you're wearing proper clothing protections. Like I said, you don't want to ruin anything or your furniture. If you're painting on a really nice dining table, you want to make sure you protect that. And when you're setting up your palette, make sure your colors are mixed first and then add the medium in. I'm not going to go into composition because I want to talk more about techniques. Quickly, color theory is just talking about how you're mixing your colors, what goes well together, and what happens when you put colors next to each other. So you have your three primary colors. So you got yellow, red, and blue. Yellow and red mixed together to make orange. Red and blue together to make purple, and yellow and blue to make green. And then when you mix primary and secondary colors, you get tertiary colors, which is that third round of colors to complete your color wheel. For analogous color schemes, it's similar colors next to each other or close to each other on the color wheel, or just adding white or black to it to get different tones. And then with complementary colors, it's just opposite colors on the color wheel. So for instance, green and purple are opposite each other, or yellow and blue, which is U of M's sports colors. And this is just a visual of the different color schemes and color theory. I'm not going to talk about perspective. So these are the techniques that we're going to be going over. So underpainting is a technique where the image is sketched out first and then painted. Usually it's one color that has a layer on it to like set up your painting. So it's put out first in one color to give that kind of tone to the end product when you're layering your paint, the rest of the paints on the canvas. And a lot of professional painters that you see in museums, they do an underpainting first. They like to plan it out first before they go to the actual meat of the painting. There's also glazing, so you'll use a very thin layer of color to work up over time. It also adds a bit of shine to the painting as well. Now with layering is really important in acrylic painting. You can work really flat, so you only have one layer, and you'll get this interesting effect on your canvas when you're painting. But over time, if you work with layers, you'll see like this interaction of colors as you progress in your painting. And some paintings can take a very long time, like weeks. So with layering, you always want to make sure your acrylic paints have dried before you move on to the next painting, which is a little bit different from oil painting because a lot of people like to work with wet on wet, and oil painting tends to work best with that because it stays wet longer. There's dry brush. So what this is that you're not adding anything to your acrylic paint, and you're going directly to the dry surface area, and you're doing your texture or your brush strokes on there, and you get this really cool like feathery effect. So a lot of people tend to use it for grass or to get a really nice visual effect of fluffy clouds. And sometimes they use the fan brush to accomplish that, but you can also use a round brush with that too, or a flat. Washing, which is similar across the board for all paints, is when you have a transparent layer of paint. So what you do is you either add gel medium, glazing medium, or purchase open acrylics so that you can get this desired effect, and it makes it more transparent so you can see what's underneath, especially if you're doing wet to dry, so your surface has dried and you add wet paint to it, then you can see what's underneath that paint that you're applying still. So sometimes that might be brush strokes or it might be specific colors. Then there's stippling, dabbing, and spattering, which is basically what it sounds like. Stippling is taking your paintbrush, this one isn't really good, and you're just dotting your painting area. It's like pointillism. So you want your dots to be very neat and ordered, especially if you're trying to achieve like a visual effect with it so that your dots make up an image. With dabbing, it's not about necessarily achieving an image, or it's more about like a specific texture. And then with spattering, you can use a paintbrush or you can use a toothbrush. And what you're doing is you're flicking the paint off the paintbrush onto your painting surface. So that S word is sgraffito, and it's scratching the paint off of your surface after it's dried. And a lot of people like to use their palette knife to do this, but you don't have to. You can use other items to do that as well, even your fingernail. But if you are kind of like me, you don't like that sensory feel with your fingernail, then a palette knife comes in handy for that, or a butter knife. And using a palette knife in and of itself is a great technique for painting too, because it goes on and it leaves this really smooth, long texture in it, and there's no brush strokes. So it has its own characteristic that lends itself to a really cool looking painting once you're finished. So that second image you see there, that's Graffito. And what they did is they had an underpainting, they did some layers, and then they scratched the dry paint off to achieve that effect there. So here's the impasto that I was telling you about before. So you can add a medium to your acrylic paint, or you can buy the heavy body acrylic paint, and then you just layer it thick onto your painting surface. In which case you would not want to use any type of paper to do this, because it would break the paper and then you wouldn't have a painting. You'd have something that you can't keep. So this person here, I have this example, they use impasto to paint somebody's face, and it looks really fascinating. It's a really neat effect. But I've seen landscapes painted this way as well, and even I think a cityscape too. So it's a really cool technique. Modeling paste can also be added. You can either add it to the paint, or you can put it on your canvas and then paint over it. I've seen so many people experiment with this. It's a really adaptable medium. And it's mostly about the desired texture result that you get when you're painting on your canvas. So that's why people use it. So gel medium, you'll save your paints longer because you'll be using less of the actual acrylic paint. If you add this medium to it, it just prolongs the pigment and the life of your paint, so you don't have to use as much. And the color doesn't change either, which is really nice. Another cool technique to use, especially if you don't have an affinity or don't like to draw, if you're worried about your drawing skill, is to use a stencil. So you can actually purchase some harder plastic that you can put over something, and then what you do is you would trace the image out on that plastic. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's worth it, trust me. Then you would cut the negative space out of that stencil, and then you'd use that stencil on your canvas to apply that image. That leaves you, there's still an element of drawing, but it's tracing. This is not necessarily cheating, but it makes it easier for you to do your desired image. So some people like to use sponges with their stencils, or they'll use a stamp. So instead of having to create a stencil, you can just purchase a stamp. You can also purchase stencils that are pre-made, and I think that they have those at Michael's or Joann's. I haven't really seen many at Meijer or Walmart. If not, it might be in a different area. It may not be in the painting section, but you can always get creative and find them in like the other crafting areas and still use that for painting. So Scumbling has been around for a really long time. Claude Monet has used Scumbling, and it's often used for smoky effects, but also lends itself to like subtle blends of color. And what you're doing is basically adding dry paint to dry canvas, and it has this different quality, this different effect to it. It keeps the brush strokes in there, and it's best to work dry with Scumbling because you don't want the colors to blend. You want it to just sit on the top of the surface there. So Alla Prima, I've already referenced this a few times while I was talking. So it's basically doing all your painting in one setting before it dries. And it's a one-layer painting technique, so you're not working with multiple layers. And it's, I guess it's an Italian phrase, so it means at first attempt. So you're just doing it all there. And a lot of, I think it's Renaissance painters, they would do this, especially when they were trying to capture the light, the changes in color and time. One moment of beautiful sunlight, or how it falls on the water or on the trees, and I think it's a really popular mode of painting too, because you just do one sitting and that's it. And then there's paint pouring, which I'm going to be having a couple classes in August 12th and August 26th. So if you're interested in learning how to do paint pouring, we're going to be doing two different types of paint pouring. Basically what it is it's layering acrylic paint that has been mixed with a medium that lends itself to more fluidness in the paint, and then you get these really cool effects when you pour it out. So it's basically kind of just having trust in the end product working out in a really nice, pleasing, aesthetic way. All right, so for this part, we're gonna start painting. If you haven't already set up your painting area, go ahead and do so. I am going to move my camera so you can see what I'm doing. If you have any sensitivities to motion, don't look at the computer right now, and then I'll let you know when I have the camera situated and it stopped moving so that no one gets sick or anything like that. So I'm about to move the camera and then we'll start painting. All right, so I'm moving the camera right now, so look away if you have any type of motion sickness. All right. Also, feel free at any time to unmute yourself and interrupt me or ask questions. It doesn't bother me at all. And if you have a hard time seeing something, just let me know. So I already have my 2 things of water here. I've got a ton of paper towel, which I'm gonna be keeping really close by. I ran out of lids, so that's why I have some plastic wrap for my black paint here. I've got my image here. So I have one where I already put a grid. So I used a ruler, which I included in the directions in the handout if you need it. So if you don't feel comfortable freehand sketching, that's okay. This is like a way to make it easier for yourself. And because the board and the image are the exact same size, you don't have to do any math or anything. It's just 1 for 1. So it's 5 by 7 for the height and the length. So what you would do is you would just mark out 1 inch across, so you get your grid, and then do it the same on the sides. And then you would use your straight edge to mark the lines there. And that way you get your squares all set up. And then you would do that again on your painting surface too. So that way, when you go to sketch in the image that you're looking at for reference, you can put it, whatever's in the square, it breaks it down, it makes it easier. So it's less overwhelming if you're just focusing on 1 square at a time. So I have already done my grid and done my sketch here. If you haven't, that's okay. I can walk you through that here real quick. Where's my pencil? All right, so what I tend to do, if you have a blank painting surface right now, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're getting like an approximation of where these points of interest are in the image. So I would suggest starting with drawing with a sketch. It's not such a big deal if it doesn't match up perfectly, especially if you're not using the grid. So start with the biggest visual element in the image, and that would be the crane here. So you want to sketch that out roughly. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. So you want like just an impression of it. So light little ovals, kind of off center. You don't want anything to be completely center in any of your images or painting. And then just like a quick gesture of the body. So you can break it down into the neck into two pieces here and just use some ovals to get it in position. And then the body is going to be a bigger oval. I wouldn't worry so much about the placement of the legs just because when we start painting, that's going to disappear. And basically what you want is you just want an impression so that you know where you're putting your paint. Then from the bird, once you have the bird body and the head situated, then you can start with this foreground piece here where it's all black. So you don't really have to worry about getting too detailed. And honestly, I wouldn't spend too much time getting all these different blades of grass and these weeds or brush all situated down because you're going to be painting. So I would just get like an impression of the line. Just get like an approximation of where that's going to fall on your painting surface. Then once you get that done, you can kind of gauge where the horizon line falls. It's a little bit off center, it's just above it. You can use your hand, you can measure it out with your pencil or paintbrush, whatever you have on hand. So what you would do is you could like use your fingers to get the approximation and then mark that there. Or if you're using a paintbrush, you would just kind of use your tip here and then use your finger to get like the distance from the edge of the painting there. So then you can mark the line for the horizon. And then I would just get like a quick gesture of the setting sun. And that's basically all the visual elements that you need to start off your painting. All right, so from this this point, we're going to use, if you've already started painting, that's totally fine. That doesn't bother me at all, and I'm actually impressed if you started painting, that's great. But if you're waiting for me, what we're gonna do is we're going to do a wash of yellow over pretty much the whole thing. So I think I put a bigger brush in there, you wanna use that one. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get some yellow out of the little container here. So I'm gonna get that ready. I'm mixing just a little bit of water here. And I don't want my yellow to be like this rich, bright yellow here. So I'm just gonna get a little dab, just a little dab of red here, and I'm gonna mix it. And this probably won't be enough to cover the whole thing, but this is what I'm gonna start with. Now I'm gonna try and be careful because I wanna keep, I wanna be able to see my pencil below so I can have those images for reference. And try not to paint in the setting sun so it's not harder later for us if the paint is still wet to paint that in like a bright white. All right, so I have my sky done. I think now what I'm gonna do is is add a little bit more yellow here. And I'm just gonna do some just straight yellow on there to make it a little bit thicker. I think I need just a little bit more. All right, I'm gonna mix a darker orange. So I'm adding red and yellow on my palette, and I'm going to mix that. So this is where a palette knife would come in handy, because then you wouldn't get the paint so far up on your brush when you're mixing. Now I'm gonna do the water. I'm gonna definitely add more yellow to this. This is way too orange. So your edges don't have to be perfect, just needs to be approximate. So when we go back in with the darker colors, you can fix it. Okay. So from here, let's get a brighter, more yellow orange. Mix this in. We're doing wet on wet here. I always kind of got in trouble with my my paint instructors at university, because I liked to mix colors as I went. So if you find out over time after painting for a while that you have a preference for one or the other, some of the rules are made to be broken. At least that's my philosophy. But at least you know starting out that it's better to have everything prepped out ahead of time. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I've got orange all over this. I'm gonna start going back in with this this orange here into my sky while it's still wet, so I can get some of that blending. And it definitely, don't worry, don't put the pressure on yourself that this is gonna be a perfect painting by the time we're done. So we're just learning, we're just having fun, and we're just experimenting. Also, if at the end of this and we get to the point where you decide you don't like it, you can just gesso over it and start over and paint something else, which is pretty nice. All right, so so now I want to get a little bit more red in here. I'm just going to keep taking from the same spot that I've been pulling from my paint, just because I've been just using red and yellow, so I don't really care that it's getting mixed up in there. And then we're just going to go in and try to mimic a little bit of this setting sun here. I'm gonna move my image because I'm gonna get paint on that. And I want to get the red in my water. There's more red over here. there's red in the ground too in the horizon. So I'm just gonna place some red here, get some on this. And there's more red in the water on the right side of the crane. Okay, so from here I'm gonna add some more yellow. I'm just gonna go back over to get my paint a little bit thicker and to add some yellow back in. All right, so on the right side in the horizon, there is a bit of purple. So the best way to get purple, and at this point, if you want to, you can clean your brush off. But orange has red in it, and most of this is orange anyway. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to keep my brush the way it is, pull from the side here, add some more red. And then I'm just gonna take a little dab of blue and definitely gonna add more red to that because I want it to be purple. And then I'm gonna add into the horizon here. So it actually goes through the crane's neck. And because the crane is black here, I'm not really worried about painting through it. I'm actually just gonna fill this in here. And then I'm gonna do it on the other side. We're gonna add some black to this eventually, but this will be good under painting. All right, so I'm just gonna add a little more blue. So it still has, this is like a darker purple. There. All right, how is everyone feeling about this so far? So actually, we kind of have our black already started here. So I'm just gonna keep using this area. I'm gonna add a little more paint, so while I'm mixing that there's more paint to work with when we go over this. So I'm going to add some more red. Some more blue. And then I'm just gonna take a little bit of black because a little bit of black goes a long way. And mix that together. So I have this really deep, like indigo. I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow. And just a little bit more black. I'm a little apprehensive about doing too much black, just because I like a more natural black. I don't like the just straight from the paint tube black. Okay, because I have so much on my paintbrush, I'm just gonna start doing down here for the foreground. Oh, I'm sorry, it looks like Donna is waiting. All right. Okay. So I'm trying to get all the paint off of my brush here. So I'm using all edges. And this part looks like it might be a reflection of the crane sanding in the foreground, but you see, I think it's going the wrong way though. So I think it's ground, but you can do what you feel more comfortable with. Okay. So I'm getting more paint on my brush. I'm gonna start doing the bird. So I'm gonna start with the body. Now don't worry if it's not perfect, that's okay. It doesn't have to look exactly the same as the image. So I'm gonna get some of the paint off the tip of my brush because I wanna go in and do his neck, and that's a finer area. So I'm gonna be using like the angle, I'm gonna be angling the paintbrush. So I have my paintbrush now kind of angled straight on so I can use the tip. Just because I don't have like a smaller round brush to do fine detail. All right, hopefully you did better than me and you got all the white areas covered. I'm gonna have to go back in and touch that up. It's better if you get it all covered the first time around, just so it doesn't look, I guess bad. I was looking for a different word, but that's what I got. All right, I'm gonna move on to the legs here. So I'm using just the tip of the brush again. And there's my bird. So now we're gonna move on to the other bigger masses. I'm gonna put this darker color here on the left side just because the land in the distance and the horizon is darker on the left side. And then I'm just gonna flatten out my paintbrush fibers here so I can get all the paint off the length of it. And now I'm just gonna put some of the grass in on the sides. So you might have to stop and like fix your paintbrush again, just so it's like crisper, so your lines don't get all fuzzy. And we are moving kind of fast, so if you wanted to, you could wait for your painting to dry and do dry brush on the paint. So mine, my weeds and grass and stuff is not going to look exactly the same as this image that I included. I'm also going to kind of mess up my edges here. So I'm gonna pull paint up from the bottom so it looks more like brush. So I don't want that stark edge there. And then I'm gonna add some on this side too. And if you want cattails, you just need like a thicker line at the tip. Now don't worry if you mess up this part, you can always paint over it. So you'd have to let it dry first because you don't want to accidentally blend anything. All right. Now I'm gonna do the rocks down here. Again, mine's not gonna look exactly like the image. So I'm trying to use just the tip of the paintbrush. All right, before I move on to do anything else, I'm gonna fix my little white areas with some yellow and orange paint. So I just wanna make sure I get all the dark paint off my paintbrush first. And when you go to clean off your paintbrush in between colors or when you're all finished, you don't want to stab your paintbrush in. You kind of want to wipe it. That way you're not pulling out all the brush fibers. I just keep doing this until I see like the least amount of pigment in my brush. Okay. So here, I still have some wet paint on here, so I'm just gonna pull that from my palette. A lot of it is dry, but luckily there is still some. It might be a struggle though. I may have to go in with the dark to touch this up after. So don't be afraid if you accidentally cover up or end up blending your orange with the dark. I mean, we try to do that layer first to prevent doing that, but I didn't get all the white space. Now, if your sky has dried, you can do another layer of yellow and oranges over it. Might look pretty cool. Or you can build up the paint on it and paint thicker with the acrylic paint to get that impasto look at it, the technique. If you water down your acrylic paints, you can do like a wash over it. It might make it look a little hazy. That might look really cool. I'm just trying to be careful here, so because my dark color paint here in the gooseneck, or I mean the crane's neck, is still wet, so I don't want that to blend here. Okay, so this looks a lot better now that I did those touch-ups. All right, with painting, you always want to do white last. And I'm aware I haven't done the birds. If you want to add the birds in, I would suggest doing that before you do the white, just because you don't want any of the dark paint mixed in with your white and show up when you're painting. But if you want to have this bird here super close to your setting sun, then just be careful. I mean, it's not right on it, so that makes it easier. That way you're not getting any of the paint mixed in. But it can be super easy to accidentally make a mistake, and then you have your bird connected to your white sun, and you have some black showing up in the white paint. So it's easy to make mistakes like that, especially if you don't clean your brush off thoroughly in between the colors that you mix. Okay, I'm going to move my paper plates under so I have a fresh plate to work with. And I'm not going to use pure white because white in real life, if you look at anything, it's not just white, it has other colors in it. I'm going to do like a little bit of, like a little tiny dab of yellow. I'm going to add that here into my white. Just a little bit more white here. So I'm mixing up my color first. Okay. Now with the sun, because it's more circular, you want to use like the tip of your brush. So you can flatten it out first, that'll help. Just make sure you have enough paint on the tip. If it's not a perfect circle, that's okay, because it is a setting sun, and the sky is doing some interesting things. All right, so I got my yellow white on here for the sun, and now I'm going to do the reflection in the water. So this doesn't have to be like a perfect layer. And if you wanted to add a little more yellow, you can do the edges. You could do yellow over it and then go back over with more white. Oops. My wrist got the better of me there. Had a little dab in the center. All right, so I'm just touching up my sun here. Okay. Now, I think what I'm gonna do is add the birds. So I'm just going to, because I don't want my black to turn gray, I'm just going to clean my brush off again. Now if you do have a fine round brush at home, go ahead and use that. Just because the birds are so fine and the brush strokes are so thin, it just makes it easier if you use a brush designed for that. All right, so I'm gonna take some black. I don't really need a whole lot. I'm gonna add some blue again because I don't want a flat black. And then some red. And then I'm just gonna press my paintbrush because I want it, I want as fine a tip as I can get with this paintbrush. And again, if you make a mistake, you can wait for it to dry and just paint over it. So don't worry. If you mess up the first go around, it's okay. And I'm just gonna do very light line. It's very scary because my hand is like shaking a little bit. All right, there's my first bird. Then I think I'll do one that has its wings more kind of flapping up over here, because I don't really want to try and make my image look exactly like this one. So I'm just gonna do that. And I don't know about you, but odd numbers always look better in images. And if you pay close attention when you make visits to museum, you'll see like stuff in 3s or 5s, just because it's more visually pleasing. So I'm gonna put a third bird, I think up here. And this one's gonna have its wings kind of going down a little bit. There. Now, If you do like a bigger one, then it looks like it's a little bit closer to the viewer of the image. If you do like a smaller one, then it looks like it's more in the background, so there's more distance. And if you were to do more birds, you could do like this bigger one to the off center to the left and do like a tiny little V. I wouldn't say directly below it, do it a little off the side and make it smaller, and it looks like there's a bird following in the distance. All right, so at this point, I can still see my pencil lines, so I didn't go thick enough with the yellow paint in the sky for my painting, so I might later on go ahead and add more to it. But we're finished unless anybody has any questions. If you want to turn your video on and show me what you ended up doing, I'd love to see what you ended up with. And thank you so much for joining me. I do have other painting classes scheduled in the future. So I'm having a Michigan sports team logo Saturday, I think August 8th, I think, at 2 p.m. I'll have to check the event calendar. And then my 2 pour painting classes, and then I will be doing another watercolor class September 2nd. So we'll be painting watercolor flowers. So if you want to attend any of those classes, you'll want to go to our event calendar at ltpl.org, and then click on event calendar so you can register. And there will be kits for those as well. So you don't have to worry about getting supplies on your own unless you want to. So that's completely up to you. You guys are so welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this.